All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jamie Cashman, and with me today is Lucas Benkin. And we are the part of the ISAC government relations team. And we're the two individuals that lobby on your behalf every day up at the Capitol and advocate what our legislative positions are and look out for the best interests of all 99 counties. And we're really pleased that you could join us as we give an overview of the 22 legislative session that wrapped up on May 25th after 3 weeks of basic overtime as the legislature and the governor's office looked to form the budget for 2023 and any remaining policy bills that they didn't have a consensus on. So today, what we're planning on doing is to give you again just a brief update of where ISAC legislative priorities and objectives shook out when the session ended, and to address any significant legislation that was debated this session that affected counties. The governor has, 30 days past May 25th to take any final action. And so we're closely monitoring things as she does final work on those bills. And what we will be doing is continuing to do further analysis on the bills that we'll present today, and then any other bills too affecting counties. And we'll be putting out a bill summary book later on this summer that outlines all the bills affecting counties. And so what we will do after we make our presentation, we'll certainly open it up for any questions that you might have. And if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a chat option. So kindly click on the chat option and submit any questions that you would like us to address as we conclude our presentation. So first of all, we'll address ISAC top priorities for 2022. The first has to deal with competency and treatment for persons in the justice system. Specifically, these are individuals that have an intensive psychiatric needs that all too often don't receive the proper treatment that they need, and end up, in our county jails and other places without getting that treatment. And so we were pleased that this session that there were several bills that were considered, and then some eventually had moved forward down to the governor's office to address those persons with intensive psychiatric needs. There was a robust debate in regard for expanding the number of beds for treatment, specifically adding beds to the mental health institutions. Unfortunately, that did not move forward, but there were some additional things that were put in place that would allow for increased treatment for those individuals. And one of them was allowing for tiered rates for Medicaid to provide additional resources for that treatment. And another big issue that we're seeing in all counties, large and small, is workforce needs and so forth for people to provide these services and so forth. And so there was language also that passed in the appropriation bill to allow for increased residency programs in our universities to allow to get more of folks out there, those treatment professionals, to get out there and provide these services. So we were very pleased by that. Next is on the Iowa Natural Resources, outdoor recreation, water quality and quantity. And so we were very pleased at the start of the session. I know one of the first bills that the Iowa General Assembly considered was as a part of major tax legislation created a mechanism to fund the outdoor or Iowa's Natural Resource and Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund. However, we did ultimately have concerns about the mechanism. We were pleased that the trust was funded, but by how they had it put together in terms of getting rid of local option sales tax and providing that increase statewide, and then creating a formula that would be distributed out to local communities. While we certainly were in strong support of funding the trust, we had strong concerns of using this mechanism to fund the trust as opposed to just raising the sales tax outright and doing it that way. Our major concern was the state keeping their commitment to fund this distribution formula that would go out to Iowa counties. We basically were just only less than a little close to a year out of when they took away, basically they went back on their word on the backfill. And so we had major concerns about them keeping their word on continuing to fund the trust this way. So ultimately, we were undecided on this piece of legislation. While we certainly supported funding the trust, the mechanism that the legislature chose to do it was something that we could not support. Next, on mental health and disability services, just a little different aspect of this than the first priority. As we have gone through the transition this year to full state funding of mental health and disability services, we looked through and tried to address a number of issues that were out there in the transition. And so one of the issues was on the carry forward balance restrictions that would go down to 5% at the end of this next fiscal year. And our concerns of the the ability of best business practices for the regions to be able to fund services, and also our concern what if the state wouldn't make their payments on time. Unfortunately, there wasn't anything that finally shook out that I know there was legislation that we supported that would raise this to 10%. But unfortunately, when it all shook out, nothing was passed. I think one of the arguments that I heard against it was, well, we haven't had a full year, the full takeover of state funding. So unfortunately, it did not move, and that percentage did not increase. But that is something that we will be watching it very closely, certainly in the future. And it's something that we might have to address. And next, I'll turn it over to Lucas.
Thanks, Jamie, and good afternoon, everyone. Our fourth top priority was on open meetings, and very simply, we were asking that language be removed. So currently, local governments and the state government can hold a public meeting via electronic means when holding that meeting in person is impractical or impossible. What we saw early during the pandemic from the governor's proclamation was simply striking the impractical and impossible language to allow more electronic meetings. And counties saw the benefit of that, not only to their boards and commissions, but to the public, the media, just more access to meetings. We thought this was something that could be implemented full-time if counties chose to do that. So we were simply asking to strike that language that says impractical or impossible, just leave it up to the discretion of the Board of Supervisors or other boards and commissions. Unfortunately, the pushback that we received was that largely that's not a large threshold to overcome, that impractical or impossible can be proven pretty easily, so leave it in place. And if it's the case where a county needs to hold a meeting electronically, they already have the authority and the tools to be able do that. So some pushback, and ultimately we weren't able to move that very far this year. And I think we'll jump right into some of our other objectives that we were working on this year. First, on electronic public construction bidding. This was signed by the governor, and this clarifies that a governmental entity can accept bids for a public improvement contract in electronic format. And on non-transferable vehicle registration, this was a proposal from the treasurers, and this exempts insurance companies that are taking title to a vehicle from the requirement that a foreign or out-of-state registered vehicle obtain an Iowa certificate of title when it's going to be transferred. So they're just added to that exemption list, so they don't need to go to the hassle if they are taking over a vehicle, most likely in the case of a complete loss where the insurance company would take it over. So that one was also signed by the governor. And PSAPs, Jamie.
Yes, and so this next objective that was signed by the governor came from our emergency management officials and the sheriffs in regard to the filing of the public safety answering point, or PSAP, reports to Homeland Security and emergency management. And basically this would basically streamlines that application and makes it a lot easier to submit these reports.
All right, and our other objectives, kind of quickly, these are those objectives that we were working on, didn't quite get over the finish line, but very quickly, the assessment review timelines following a disaster declaration from our assessor's affiliate. This actually started to move. It passed I believe it was the House Local Government Committee, and then started to get some pushback from the Department of Revenue about some of the arbitrary decisions that the assessors could make on the timelines in the case of a disaster. They felt that there should be more discussion with the department if timelines were going to be changed, so kind of ran into some roadblocks there. Moving down to certificates of title, this is another proposal from the treasurers. We've been working on this for a number of years. Finally got to language that stakeholders could agree on. First, it would allow for the cross-county titling, and it also had fee increases, $10 for certain fees associated with those titles. And so this made it through last year made it through House Local Government. This year through House Ways and Means, was ready for floor debate, and frankly the votes just weren't there, primarily because of the fee increases. There just wasn't the appetite to take that on this year. And non-resident driver's license issuance and renewal. This also comes from the treasurers. This would put in place a $10 convenience fee for out-of-county issuance or renewal of driver's license. This came to us mostly from our friends in Jones County, who are seeing the majority of their customers on driver's license from neighboring Lynn County. And as we know, the cost of providing the service is greater than the fees retained by the county, and largely subsidized by property tax in each and every county. So add in the fact that a lot of the customers, majority of the customers, come from outside of the county. You have the property taxpayers of one county subsidizing a service for another. So the idea here was a convenience fee. So you don't have to pay it, but if you're going to a county that's not your residence or where you don't own property, you would pay an additional $10 for that renewal. So this actually passed the House and passed Senate Ways and Means, and then got held up and was not brought up for a vote on the Senate floor. And moving on to tax sale postponement or cancellation, another one from the treasurers, and another one that came about, the idea came about because of the pandemic and the tax sale in 2020 being delayed, and a lot of questions related to, so now what do we do? And what authority does the treasurer have on rescheduling, or for lack of a better term, just taking the year off, just postponing until the next tax sale. So this proposal would have given the treasurer the authority to reschedule, perhaps later in the summer or in the fall, or just wait until the following year and put those properties up the following summer. So this one was also held up in Senate Ways and Means. It passed the full House, it passed Senate Local Government, and then was held up in Senate Ways and Means. And finally, the Zoning Commission and Board of Adjustment membership. As you recall, a couple of years ago, the law was changed to say members on the county's Zoning Commission and the Board of Adjustment needed to live in the area affected by the zoning ordinance. So in other words, the unincorporated area of the county. Most counties that we've spoken to have had difficulty filling vacancies or finding replacements for those that could no longer serve. We did have a bill introduced actually by the legislator that had the original bill, and this would exempt counties with population 20,000 or below from these new rules. So in their case, it would be they could in fact have people from the cities sitting on those boards and commissions, and this would be about 2/3 of counties. And we were starting to get some movement with the bill. We did have ideas from our objective, such as allowing individuals that maybe a retired farmer that still owns property in the unincorporated area but happens to live in town. Folks like that could serve. We also had ideas on making that good faith effort to find someone, but if you can't, then just fill the vacancy, and it may be someone that lives in town, but fill the vacancy rather than having this opening that you can't fill because of the new law. So we had those conversations. Ultimately, it got just a little bit too heavy, and the legislator said, "That's it for this year." But if the problem continues to exist, we know that we can pick this conversation up next year. I will turn it over to Jamie for the rest of the list.
All right, so first on conduct of elections, and a number of things were contained underneath this objective, which came from the county auditors. As we have seen omnibus election bills for the last 2 or 3 years now, affecting how county auditors, as the commissioner of elections, handle them, whether it's absentee or at the polls. And so, this is one, we're never satisfied, first of all, with any session that goes by, or even when, an objective, certainly when an objective doesn't move forward. But I can say that we're actually pleased as a whole that nothing was addressed majorly in regard to conduct of elections, because yet again this year, there was a major omnibus election bills in both the House and the Senate that were hanging out there until the very end, that were again very detrimental to county auditors and on how they conduct elections, specifically on absentee and early voting. And so when it finally shook out, nothing, like I said, majorly passed when they gavelled out for the year. So this is one where we can say that we were actually pleased that nothing really took place in regard to that. However, we were pleased that we were on the House side able to get a bill out of a subcommittee that would increase the absentee window between in-person early voting and then the mailing of the ballots. And so that is something, but that was 3 days that passed out of a House subcommittee. And that's something, unfortunately, it wasn't considered by the full standing committee, but that's something that we'll be looking at again for 2023. And then next was also election related from the auditors in regard to the elimination of requiring both a voter acknowledgement card and then a voter PIN card, why you need to have both. And again, that all got wrapped up in all the other election legislation that, again, did not move. Next, on emergency preparedness supply weekend, what this would do, and this came from emergency management, to expand the sales tax holiday, the school sales tax holiday in August, for emergency preparedness supplies, from a variety of different things, from generators and tarps and a whole first aid kits and so forth. And we're happy that we got it out of the House Ways and Means subcommittee, and then also the Senate Ways and Means subcommittee. But unfortunately, as they look to do the final tax bills to wrap up the session, it wasn't considered. And then lastly, on this public intoxication from substances other than alcohol, there was a subcommittee that was held in the House, but unfortunately, there wasn't enough consensus to move this forward. So we'll turn it over to the next other legislation.
All right, just a few bills that we wanted to draw your attention to. And as a reminder, we have in our legislative package policy statements that guide us on how to register, how to handle bills that might not be one of our top priorities or objectives, but we know they're, the topics might come up. And so we use our policy statements to figure out how to interact with legislation that's proposed. And I'll also add that if affiliates have legislation that they bring forward or that they're working on, we'll be supportive of those efforts, help in any way that we can. I guess the asterisk would be, as long as it's not in conflict with other affiliates, we'll go to work. And so just a few pieces here that we wanted to draw your attention to. First, on groundwater hazard statements, the recorders were working on this bill, and so that's House File 2343. And what this did is basically says that the groundwater hazard statement is not required if there are no hazards found, and you would simply denote on the first page that there were no hazards, and then that eliminates the additional page, which would be just a bunch of boxes checked no. So kind of streamlines it and gets rid of that extra page on the groundwater hazard statement. And then Senate File 2366 on wind energy conversion property. I think a lot of you are well aware of this, largely clarifying legislation that in the case of repowering on wind turbines, the net acquisition cost as well as the assessment schedule would remain in place if there's repowering. So new blades, motors, whatever the case might be, the net acquisition cost stays the same. The assessment schedule, the special valuation schedule stays the same. And then there was also clarification on if there is no special valuation in place or if the ordinance is repealed, how the transition works to the utility replacement tax. I'll also note that this legislation was a result of a recommendation from the Utility Replacement Tax Task Force, on which ISAC sits, and was agreement upon, among the stakeholders that sit on the task force. And so we were very happy to see this move along. We have received a number of questions, and last month we did a webinar on just this bill. So if you still have questions, I would direct you to that webinar if you missed it. So if you go to our website at iowacounties.org, and along the top, you'll see meetings, and under that tab, you'll find webinars. You'll find all of our past webinars, but that one was last month, and it's also where you'll be able to find today's webinar within the coming days.
All right, next on Supervisor candidate petition signatures, House File 2466. This popped up this year, specifically on legislation that passed a few years ago in regard to signature requirements for Plan 3 counties, and the large number it would now require. That was an unintended consequence of this legislation. And so what we had worked on and supported was lowering this threshold, down to 50 signatures. And this was something that we had heard from especially more rural counties, from supervisors, and also from county auditors, that were having hearing major concerns as candidates were getting close to the filing deadline. And so we supported this legislation.
Okay, and just to touch on a couple pieces of legislation that we were registered against and unfortunately passed and were signed by the governor. And I did notice in the chat that someone asked about ATVs on secondary roads. I believe the question was, are you going to talk about it? And the answer is yes, right now. So, this is a topic that has come up, it seems like every year, basically to allow ATV use on secondary roads. It was getting up to about 2/3 of counties had already considered this and adopted an ordinance that in part or in whole allowed ATV use on secondary roads. That was a pretty big thing to overcome when having this conversation, because our position was it doesn't matter if it's 2/3 or 98, 99ths. This should be a local decision. As we continue to say, the boards of supervisors, in consultation with the county attorney, county sheriff, county engineer, should evaluate if it's right for their county. As I said, it was getting more and more difficult to, continue to make that argument, but we were a part of the conversation and made what eventually passed and was signed a lot more workable than just allow them all. So there are some, I guess, some provisions that we like because it does maintain local control. So just to kind of recap what the legislation does, it allows the use of ATVs and ORVs on the unpaved secondary roads, on all unpaved secondary roads, and on hard surface secondary roads when it's used as a connector. So getting from, let's say, city streets, if a city allows it, to a gravel road, or from an ATV park to a gravel road or a residence. So if used as a connector, they can use the hard surface secondary roads. The same applies for the primary road system, the state highways. Those can be used, but only as connectors. And then also for the hard surface roads, the Board of Supervisors can allow more expansive use than just as a connector if they choose to in their county. So they can have those conversations and decide if they want to allow more use on the hard surface roads. And the other thing that I would point out is that there are statewide rules now. So things like headlamps, age requirements, things like that will be statewide and uniform under this legislation. And next we have fireworks. This was kind of an interesting process because the fireworks language was attached to legislation that had nothing to do with fireworks. It did have to do with city zoning. So this language on fireworks was attached, no public comment, no subcommittee process. So comments, especially those that could have pointed out some of the issue, were not heard because the meetings did not exist. But what the legislation basically does is says counties and cities can't regulate where fireworks are sold as long as it's in the commercial or industrial zone of their jurisdiction. So previously could not mess with the use, but you could still regulate where the sales occurred. This would preempt local governments from doing that for fireworks. And then finally, on septic tanks, this legislation basically says a county can't enforce a penalty, fine, or fee for non-compliance with rules related to periodic pumping of septic tanks. Unfortunately, these regulations might be in place to protect people from themselves, quite frankly. And this legislation says the county should not be issuing fines if people aren't taking care of their septic systems and getting them pumped periodically. And just a few other bills to bring to your attention. We were registered undecided, but obviously a part of the conversation on these bills. First, on the all systems permit, this is a new permit that would allow a total gross weight of up to 90,000 pounds for divisible or indivisible loads, as long as they comply with the other length and size requirements or limitations. The counties can indicate to the DOT on which roads the permit would not be valid, but the permit does put in place a new fee, $500 for this permit, and 3/4 of that will go to a fund for secondary road bridges. Next, we had a Department of Revenue policy bill that contained changes to the business property tax credit. It sets or puts in place the future repeal of the business property tax credit, and instead puts in place, for lack of a better word, an exemption that would act in a very similar way to how the credit works. So for valuation of commercial industrial property up to $150,000, there will be an exemption for the difference between the rollback on commercial industrial, which is set at 90%, and the rollback for residential property. So as we've always said with BPTC, it makes it so commercial business in the same jurisdiction at $150,000 value will pay the same tax as a single family home at $150,000. So it just makes up that difference between the two rollbacks. And it is funded at $125 million, which is the same as the business property tax credit. The one thing I will caution about, however, is that because it's an exemption and not a credit, if it's not funded, that will have to be absorbed by the local governments. So the property owner will receive that benefit regardless of the funding at the state level. So that is something we'll now have to keep an eye on every year, unfortunately, to make sure that that is fully funded. The other thing that I'll add on this is by getting rid of the credit and putting in place kind of this blanket exemption, all properties will qualify. So there are those commercial properties, industrial properties out there that were qualified but never applied, never received the business property tax credit. They'll receive this exemption automatically now. So just something to be aware of as this takes place. Some new folks will get a benefit. The benefit will be smaller for some folks. So I'm sure at your desks and in your email and on your phones, you'll be hearing about these changes. And of course, ISAC will be working with the Department of Revenue and you, our members, to hopefully make this a smooth transition. And the final one I'll talk about is on shared assessor, Senate File 384. This one has been around for a couple of years. It basically allows counties to share an assessor or assessor's office staff. We know with the difficulty of filling the positions, this can be a good thing if counties can reach an agreement, and if the assessor is willing to take on 2 counties, that a shared assessor could be a beneficial thing for those counties.
All right, and then on joint 911 boards, basically this would allow, but not mandate, that a local emergency management commission to assume the duties of a joint 911 service board. All right, and lastly, I just wanted to give a brief update on the American Rescue Plan Act. Many of you should have received or should be in the process of receiving your second tranche of funding, which you should receive 1 calendar year after you got your first tranche. There should have been an email that came from Treasury for you to go into a portal for you to receive that funding. So if you're having issues or haven't received any information in regard to that, please continue to reach out to us on that. On guidance and reporting, the Treasury has come out with an updated reporting guidance, and then also on the recovery plan as well, and also a reporting template. The next reporting deadline is July 31st for the project and expenditure reports. However, these are for only the counties that are more or less 250,000 in population and have received over or forecasted to receive over 10 million. In terms of their appropriation and so forth. So a majority of the counties in Iowa will not have to go through this reporting round that will be coming up. So to see the template, the updated guidance, please go to that Treasury link and so forth. So with that, we'll open it up for any questions. So I think Lucas handled the first one. I'll go into the chat. Oh, you got that too. So we got the Treasury link. So yeah, we'll open up for any questions.
Lucas, we did have a follow-up on the House File 2130 in the question box.
Right. Yes,
sorry,
thank you, Katie. I do see that. And so it will be effective July 1st. So the first of the question, is it effective immediately or July 1st? It'll be July 1st. And this is on House File 2130 on ATVs on secondary roads. So July 1st, does it void current county ordinances? I would say you will need to look at your ordinance and see how that might interact with what the bill allows and what it prohibits. So I think most counties will probably need to take a close look and figure out how their ordinance would interact, and then if changes need to be made. But I don't believe it explicitly says that they're void. So you'll just need to make sure that it is compatible with the new law. And then there was no, the final part of the question is, does this apply to farm to market extensions under county jurisdiction that extend into city limits? This was not specifically addressed, but I'll look into that and see if we can't get a clear answer on that for the farm to market extensions.
All right, any other questions? All right, well, again, we will be putting out a bill summary book later on this summer that will provide in greater detail of what all transpired this session affecting counties. Also, you should have received with an update for this webinar that the process for the 2023 ISAC policy development process has begun. And you should have links to look at how you can submit proposals. We strongly encourage that you first work with your affiliate to generate those proposals through your affiliate, but we certainly will entertain any proposal that comes from any member. And all we have to receive those by August 5th. So again, we want to thank you for joining us. And if you have any additional questions, I know since session has ended, you have reached out to both Lucas and myself. So please continue to do so. And again, we can't thank you enough for all that you continue to do to assist us, not only, certainly during this session and previous sessions. So again, we can't thank you enough, and thank you again for joining us.